If you carried a flamethrower in the Pacific, your life expectancy was measured in minutes. One Marine battalion at Iwo Jima lost 92% of its flamethrower operators. Out of over 300 men who carried these weapons onto that island, fewer than 20 walked off. And the reason wasn't just the danger of the job, it was that everyone on that battlefield, friend and enemy alike, knew exactly who you were the moment you fired. The Japanese had standing orders to kill flamethrower operators first. Every mortar crew, every machine gunner, every rifleman who spotted you would turn and focus fire on the man with 70 pounds of napalm strapped to his back. But here's what makes this story darker than most people realize. The battlefield was only half of it, because the men who survived had to live with what they'd done, burning other human beings alive for the rest of their lives. And some of them never recovered. Let's start from the very beginning. The flamethrower wasn't an American invention. The Germans introduced it during the First World War, and from the moment it appeared, everyone understood this was a different kind of weapon. At Verdun in 1916, German assault teams used flamethrowers to clear French trenches. The effect was devastating, not just physically, but psychologically. Soldiers who survived described the terror of watching fire pour into a trench, hearing the screams, smelling burning flesh. The French High Command formally protested, calling it inhumane, but the protests didn't stop anyone from building more of them. By the time the Second World War began, every major power had flamethrowers in their arsenal. But nobody used them the way the Americans would in the Pacific. You see, when Marine divisions started island hopping toward Japan, they ran into a problem that no existing weapon could solve. Japanese defenders didn't fight from trenches or open positions. They dug into coral rock and volcanic stone, building reinforced concrete bunkers connected by miles of underground tunnels. Naval bombardment couldn't collapse them. Airstrikes couldn't reach them. At Tarawa in 1943, 3 days of shelling that should have killed everything on the island barely scratched the defenses. When Marines hit the beach, machine guns opened up from positions that looked like solid rock. Someone had to figure out how to kill men hiding in holes, and the answer was fire. Now here's where things get interesting from a technical standpoint, because how this weapon worked explains everything about why carrying one was so dangerous. The portable flamethrower weighed 68 pounds fully loaded. Think about that. For a man like Corporal Woody Williams, who weighed 126 pounds, that weapon was more than half his body weight. You had 3 cylinders strapped to a backpack frame, 2 outer tanks holding 4 gallons of napalm, 1 central tank of compressed nitrogen at 350 pounds per square inch. And here's the number that defined everything. You had 7 to 9 seconds of fuel, 9 seconds of fire, then you were empty. Your effective range was 20 to 40 yards, which meant you had to get close enough to see the enemy's face before you burned it off. The fuel itself made the weapon work. Napalm, a mixture of gasoline and aluminum soap developed at Harvard in 1942, burned at nearly 2,000 degrees and stuck to whatever it touched. Unlike regular gasoline that blooms into a fireball and dissipates, napalm could ricochet off walls, pour through bunker openings, follow air currents into tunnels. It didn't just kill the men it touched. It consumed the oxygen in enclosed spaces and suffocated anyone the flames didn't reach. The tactical reality came down to one brutal equation. You were the most effective man in your unit, and everyone knew it. When a squad approached a Japanese pillbox, riflemen could suppress the ports. Grenades might wound a few defenders, but actually clearing the position meant someone had to get close enough to put fire inside. That someone was you. And the moment you fired, a 40-foot stream of burning napalm announced exactly where you were. Every Japanese soldier within 500 yards could see you. Japanese prisoners confirmed that standing orders prioritized killing flamethrower operators above all other targets. Mortar crews didn't aim at American units. They aimed at individual flamethrower men. The 70-pound pack made you slower than everyone else. You couldn't take cover as quickly. You couldn't run as fast, and if a bullet hit your fuel tank, you didn't need the enemy to kill you anymore. You had enough napalm on your back to turn yourself into exactly what you'd been doing to them. Now let me tell you about some of the men who actually carried these weapons, because the statistics only mean something when you know who was behind them. Corporal Herschel Woodrow Williams was 21 years old, 5'5", 126 pounds when he landed on Iwo Jima. The flamethrower weighed more than half his body weight. On February 23, 1945, the same day the flag went up on Mount Suribachi, Williams spent 4 hours destroying 7 Japanese pillboxes single-handed. 4 riflemen covered him. 2 were killed doing it. Williams went back to his own lines 5 times for fresh flamethrowers and demolition charges. At one point, he climbed on top of a bunker and stuck the nozzle through an air vent. When Japanese soldiers charged him with bayonets, he burned them with a burst of flame. Years later, Williams admitted he couldn't remember most of those 4 hours. He attributed the gaps to fear. What he did remember was the smell. "There is an odor that emanates from that," he said. "That is like no other odor on Earth." Williams received the Medal of Honor, the only man ever decorated specifically for flamethrower actions. But he spent 17 years trying to forgive himself. "I had tremendous difficulty," he recalled, "because I couldn't forgive myself for having to take so many lives in such a horrible, horrible way." He drank heavily at his local Veterans Hall until 1962, when he finally found peace through his wife's church. Williams died in June of 2022 at 98 years old, the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from the Second World War. And then there was Don Graves. His numbers are staggering. "I'm the only flamethrower in the 2nd Battalion that came off," he said. "We had 335 Marines going in. 18 came off." Graves had a religious experience face down in the volcanic sand, convinced he was about to die. He spent the next 32 years as a minister, trying to make peace with what he'd witnessed. Private Dominic Tutelo was 19 years old and 126 pounds, carrying 70 pounds of napalm. His squad was nearly wiped out in their first engagement. When asked how he handled the danger, he explained the mental trick required to function. "You're carrying a tank of napalm, but you don't think it's dangerous. Your mind doesn't think about that." That denial was the only way to do the job. You couldn't dwell on what you were carrying. You just moved forward and tried not to think. Let me put you in that position for a moment. It's February 1945. You're 19 years old on Iwo Jima. Your squad is pinned by a concrete pillbox dug into volcanic rock. 2 Marines are dead. The rifleman can suppress the firing port, but every time someone moves, machine gun fire cuts them down. Your sergeant looks at you. You both know what happens next. You start crawling. The volcanic sand is black and hot. Bullets snap overhead, close enough that the air pops near your ears. The tank is so heavy, your elbows dig grooves in the ground. At 30 yards, you realize they've spotted you. Rounds start hitting closer. At 20 yards, you can see the firing port, an 18-inch slot in grey concrete. You rise to one knee, squeeze the trigger, and watch burning napalm pour through the opening. You hear screaming. That sound will follow you home. It will wake you up at 3 a.m. for the next 40 years. But right now you don't have time to think about it, because every Japanese position in sight is firing at you, and you've got 5 seconds of fuel left and 200 yards of open ground between you and cover. Some men made that sprint. Most didn't. By the battle's end, Iwo Jima had consumed 360,000 gallons of flamethrower fuel, roughly 10,000 gallons per day. Over 30% of Japanese defenders died by fire. Commanders called the flamethrower the single most valuable weapon in the Pacific. At Okinawa, the military fielded 54 Sherman tanks converted to carry flamethrowers. The tank battalion conducted over 600 attacks in 85 days and achieved a 40-to-1 kill ratio. Nearly 5,000 Japanese dead against 8 American tank crewmen. Armor changed the equation, but for the men who still carried portable flamethrowers on their backs, nothing really changed. They were still priority targets. They still had to close within 20 yards of fortified positions, and they still carried their war home with them. The military never conducted a formal study comparing flamethrower casualties to regular infantry. The viral claim that operators survived 4 seconds appears nowhere in official records. It's probably an internet myth, but the verified numbers don't need exaggeration. 92% casualties in 1 battalion, fewer than 20 survivors from 300 operators, and decades of nightmares for the men who made it back. Flamethrowers were phased out of American service by the 1970s. The military concluded the psychological cost, both to operators and to America's image, outweighed the tactical benefits. Today, no major military issues portable flamethrowers to infantry. General Clifton Cates, who commanded the 4th Marine Division at Iwo Jima and later became Commandant of the Marine Corps, offered an assessment that the men who carried these weapons would probably agree with. He said he couldn't think of a more inhumane weapon. Woody Williams spent 17 years haunted by the smell of what he'd done before finding peace. Don Graves built a second life in ministry. Tutalo blocked the memories for decades, and when Williams finally accepted what his Medal of Honor meant, he said it no longer belonged to him. After learning the two riflemen covering him had been killed, he decided the medal belonged to them. He wore it in their honor for the rest of his life. The flamethrower worked. It saved American lives by ending Japanese resistance in positions that couldn't be taken any other way. The men who carried them didn't have a choice about the job. They did have to live with it afterward. That was the real horror.